mobile VR will probably be most people's first experience with virtual reality. It consists of a phone, a headset, and sometimes a hand controller. And honestly, it offers a lot of advantages. Namely, that it's completely wireless, it requires no external computer, and it's also a phone when it's not a headset. Right now, if you want to break into VR, mobile's a good place to start. As it stands, you have two main choices and a third, less exciting option. The first two are Google's Daydream system and Samsung's Gear VR. The Daydream system, unlike the Gear VR, is compatible with most Android phones. It offers an adequate experience, and it is what I would consider to be mid-tier. It isn't as precise as the Gear VR, doesn't have quite as large a field of view, but it is less expensive, significantly so, at $80 compared to the Gear VR's $130. But the Gear VR has quite a few advantages over the Daydream system. Chiefly that, unlike the Daydream system, which is just an inert piece of plastic and glass, the Gear VR has sensors in it that complement the sensors found in your phone. What this allows for is very precise rotational tracking, more so than can be found in any other VR system. In addition, the only phones that can run on the Gear VR are of exceedingly high quality, with the best screens you're going to find in a phone. The third option is what I would consider to be the lowest possible tier of mobile VR.
This uses any phone. The field of vision it says 80 degrees field of vision in this $5 one, but really you feel like you're looking through a square block about this big. Unlike the Gear VR, I think it has about 120 degree field of vision. So just right off the bat, it looks 100 times better.
It's the headsets that you can find in CVS, at Walmart, sometimes even at ShopRite. They'll work with any phone that you can throw in there, and they're low quality. The phones that you put in there normally weren't designed for VR. The experiences vary wildly. And while you can find some good headsets for iPhones, iPhone has such a low screen resolution that it really can't hold a camera to the higher end Android VR systems. But if you have an iPhone and that's all you can get, definitely pick it up. It's worth a shot. At $15, you won't lose much. So overall, mobile VR is pretty okay if that's all you can afford, and I really recommend trying it out if you get the chance. If you've got about $130 lying around and a new Samsung phone, 100% buy a Gear VR. Similarly for the Daydream system. If you really want to just give it a shot, go for the really cheap option, $15 or something. And if you have an iPhone, you might want to go with one of the more expensive third-party headsets. And while you'll have an enjoyable experience, I wouldn't expect to be blown away or be fully immersed with a mobile VR headset. At the end of the day, it only tracks rotational positioning, and it's still a phone. You shouldn't expect anything greater than what you would see on a three-dimensional phone game today. And while it is mobile, I'm not sure if you'd want to use it in public. I went online to a few discussion forums about this very topic, and I found some pretty interesting points. The problem with mobile VR is that it only has 3 degrees of freedom. It's hard to describe how that feels without trying it, so I'll let my pal LGR explain.
Another slight downside is the fact that there is no positional head tracking on this thing, so if you're moving forwards, backwards, this way, that way, up or down, it's not going to detect any of that. It basically treats you like your head is on the top of a tripod, and you're looking around in 360 degrees, which is fine for most of what's on here. You see a lot of 360-degree video type of apps and games where you're just sort of in one spot and looking around. That's fine when you designed for that, but it makes it hugely disorienting if you're in any kind of situation where you feel like you want to do this. It just doesn't match.
To sum it up, mobile VR can't let you move around in a 3D space. Like LGR mentioned, you can't lean side to side, up or down, or forward and backward. If you try it out, you'll definitely feel the full effects of the whole head on a swivel phenomenon. Comparably, desktop VR offers extremely precise sub-millimeter tracking, meaning that both your hands and your head are accurately tracked to within a millimeter. Desktop VR is an entirely different beast. If VR were compared to automobiles, mobile VR is like your dad's car. It's reliable and affordable, but nothing about it stands out. It is an overwhelmingly average experience. Ooh, but desktop VR? Desktop VR is like... It's the top dog. At this point, desktop VR is literally the best possible experience you can have in virtual reality. Even professionals who have tons of cash to burn still can't do better than the models available to consumers today. Desktop VR is a Ferrari F40. It's incredible if you can afford it, and if you have a powerful PC, and if you're willing to make room for VR, and if you're willing to set up permanent base stations, and the list goes on from there. It's the best at what it does, but that's all it can do. Just like that vintage Ferrari, breaking out a headset is an event. When you wear it, you have to prepare, because you may accidentally clock your dog in the face if you forget to keep him out, just like I did. Yet even after all that trouble, it's still worth it. You have to put a lot of effort in, but just like tearing down a track at 200 miles an hour, being able to get fully immersed in impossible worlds is worth every second of tedium. You can call VR many things, but simple isn't one of them. Although it now seems pretty straightforward, tracking a user through three-dimensional space required some pretty crazy math and engineering, and for all its quirks, it's frankly amazing that it works nearly as well as it does. As of the release of this video, there are 3 competing methods of positional tracking, each one completely unique from the others. These 3 systems are the Constellation system, used by the Oculus Rift, the Lighthouse system, used by the HTC Vive, and the Inside Out system, used by Windows Mixed Reality systems. The first such tracking system we'll be discussing is the Oculus Rift's Constellation system. The Constellation system, to put it simply, uses flashing LEDs and a camera setup to track a headset. It's quite a bit more complicated than that, but I'll try and explain it as best I can. Let's start with the base stations. While you can technically use the headset with just one camera, you'll need at least 2 to get full 360 tracking. These cameras can capture an image up to 60 times a second, and because they're plugged into the computer, these cameras are in perfect sync. That means when camera 1 captures an image, camera 2 is capturing an image at the exact same moment. This synchronization is critical for multi-base tracking, and we'll get on that in a moment. The headset and controllers are littered with IR LEDs that all flash at different patterns. In fact, that's where the system gets its name. Because of the LED placement, it kind of looks like stars in the sky. Because of the positions of the LEDs are known relative to each other, and because they're all flashing at different patterns, the cameras only need to see a few of them, not the whole headset. When the cameras see the tracking lights, they check for a few different things to get a good idea of where the headset is. Because the computer knows exactly what LEDs are flashing at exactly what rates, plus where these LEDs are on the headset relative to each other, the camera can use this info to work out where the headset is in relation to the base stations. All the system has to do is figure out what LEDs it's looking at, and then it can work out how far the headset is from the camera and where it is in relation to the camera. Since it knows where the LEDs on the headset are relative to each other, it just has to measure the distance between the LEDs to figure out how far the headset actually is. It can then take the position of these LEDs relative to the camera to figure out what position the headset is in. Because the cameras are in perfect sync, the computer has 2 images of the position of the headset at the exact same point in time, allowing it to track the user even when one controller may be obscured from the camera. This information, combined with the tracking present within the headset, allows for the Constellation system to determine both the position and rotation of the user up to 60 times a second. The Lighthouse system takes a vastly different approach. Placed across the surface of the Vive and its controllers is an array of IR-sensitive photodiodes. When these diodes are hit with IR light, they send a signal to the tracking computer that they've been hit. By timing the pulses between each hit, the system can figure out where it is relative to the base stations. As always, it's way more complicated than that, so buckle up. A Vive Lighthouse 1.0 base station has three major components: the reset LEDs, the Z-axis cylinder, which contains a laser, and the X-axis cylinder, which also contains a laser. About every 16.6 milliseconds, which is 1/60th of a second, the reset LED flashes, and then either the X or Z-axis cylinders will make a sweep. Once the photodiode gets hit with the reset flash, it starts counting until it gets hit with either the X or the Z laser sweep. Depending on how long that takes, it can figure out its position relative to the base station. Let's assume that the headset gets hit by the X-axis sweep 8.3 milliseconds after the reset flash. Since that's half the time it would take before the next reset flash, the sensor knows that the sweep is halfway complete. Now the sensor knows that it's 90 degrees horizontal from the station. After the reset pulse, the diodes start counting again. This time, let's say they get hit by the Z sweep 12.45 milliseconds after the reset pulse. This puts the headset at 135 degrees below the station. Unfortunately, this doesn't tell us the distance, since we only have two axes available. However, since we did calibration when setting up the headset, the computer knows exactly where the base stations are relative to each other. Since each base station is going through the process I described earlier, and since each computer knows the position of each diode relative to the other, figuring out depth is possible. VR moves quickly though, and Lighthouse 1.0 is already beginning to become obsolete. Lighthouse 2.0 brings a complete change to the entire system. Valve has somehow figured out to encode data into the individual laser sweeps. I'm not sure what magic they used to accomplish this, but now the pulses can announce what angle they're at. I don't know how they managed to transform digital data to laser light pulses, but they've managed to do it, and it changes everything. The reset flashes are no longer needed, and now more than two base stations can be used, since the base station ID can now be encoded into the laser pulse. And again, I should stress that this process happens 60 times every second. And like the Oculus, when this is combined with the tracking data present within the actual headset, you can get extremely precise tracking. The third and most convenient method is inside-out tracking. This system does away with external base stations, and instead uses a pair of black and white cameras inside the headset. These cameras note prominent points in the environment around the user to create a three-dimensional map of the user's surroundings. By tracking where these points are in relation to the headset, and by comparing both images from the cameras, both depth and position can be calculated. It's really difficult for me to describe what happens behind this, since I'm more of a hardware guy and this is all software, so I'll let the Microsoft team explain it.
Early map makers would start by noting prominent physical or geological features and then fill in details by placing items relative to these markers. As the cartographer explored more and more of an area, the accuracy of the map would improve. HoloLens maps a room in a similar way. Tracking works to recognize surfaces and features of a room. When holograms are world-locked, that is, placed relative to real objects, then the holograms are anchored relative to these surfaces. As the user moves around a room, the details of a room continue to be mapped so that the placement of holograms relative to these surfaces becomes more accurate and solid. Since tracking is more accurate at closer distances, the image the HoloLens has of a room continues to increase in accuracy over time as the user moves and views room objects from various angles. You can even have multiple anchors in a world-locked scenario, with each anchor having its own coordinate system. The holographic APIs help you translate coordinates between the different coordinate systems. As the HoloLens continues to track and get better information about its environment, the translation between these coordinate systems will get more precise. Best of all, this information can be persisted so that the HoloLens knowledge of a room can be retained for the next session or shared with another device. This opens up many possibilities to create imaginary shared worlds.
Hopefully by now you have a firm understanding of VR and the systems behind it. But for the end of this video, I want to show you the future of VR and what's possible with the technology we have now. What you're about to see are real, actual prototypes, not models. These actually exist, and we will definitely see them in our lifetime. Enjoy.
It's all about you, 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 all about you.